Ned Stark stood in the dimly lit bedchamber, the sickly sweet scent of death clawing at his nostrils. Robert Baratheon, his friend, his king, lay still, each rasping breath growing more shallow. The pale candlelight etched hollows into Robert's once robust cheeks, revealing a man ravaged by a mortal boar's wound and too much wine in his last days. Nearby hovered Grand Maester Pycelle, face drooping with age and worry, adjusting the damp cloth on Robert's brow. Queen Cersei stood beside the bed with her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes tinged with the faint glimmer of tears that may or may not have been genuine. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky over King's Landing, and a sharp tang of ozone drifted in through the open window. Ned could almost feel the realm trembling as the man who had held it together by might and force of will began slipping away. Robert's eyes opened and closed in dull flickers, and Ned leaned closer to catch the whispered words. "Promise me, Ned." Robert's voice was little more than a ragged breath, but Ned caught each syllable with the attentiveness of a man who'd once loved and served him as a brother. "You'll protect the realm, my son, Joffrey." The name died on his lips, as though even in his final hour some last scrap of doubt gnawed at him. But these were the words that spilled forth, shaped by the illusions of fatherhood that Ned knew were false. "He sits the Iron Throne after me." Ned wanted to correct him. He wanted to say, "That boy is not your son." But Robert's life was draining away with each labored breath, and the man deserved peace, if only for these final moments. Ned took Robert's hand, large and calloused though now limp and cold. "I promise," he whispered, though the vow tasted like ash on his tongue. Robert exhaled a last, rattling breath, fingers going slack in Ned's. The thunder pealed again, echoing through the castle like a death knell. Silence hung thick in the bedchamber. Ned felt a roil of emotions: grief, regret, and, pressing hardest, the crushing weight of duty. Cersei tore her gaze from Robert's body and looked to Ned with an unreadable expression. He offered her a slight bow out of courtesy, but he did not linger. There were matters to tend to, urgent matters that could not wait. With Robert's final breath, the realm had changed in the blink of an eye. Most men would accept the notion that Joffrey was king. Ned Stark, however, knew a secret that threatened to tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. He made his way out of the room and into the corridor, his boots dulling the hiss of wind under the castle's vaulting roofs. Lord Peter Baelish was waiting, leaning against a marble pillar with his hands folded. He wore a mild smile that never reached his calculating eyes. Littlefinger, a man whose cunning Ned had long mistrusted and whose counsel he had taken only when forced by circumstance. "Lord Stark," Peter greeted softly, "my condolences on your friend's passing. I know how heavy grief can weigh, and you have my sympathies." Ned's fingers tightened around the rolled parchment in his hand. Robert's last will and testament, signed mere hours before his death, naming Ned protector of the realm until the rightful heir came of age. Rightful heir. Ned had argued in vain to keep that phrase, but Robert, clouded by pain and wine, had demanded the paper named Joffrey. In the end, Ned's subtle alteration, substituting the words "my heir" in place of Joffrey, had passed unnoticed by the dying king. A meager victory. "I have work to do," Ned said, voice low. "The council must meet at once." Littlefinger nodded and gestured for Ned to follow him. "Yes, of course, and I'm sure you've much on your mind regarding succession. But might I suggest a moment's caution? The realm can't bear needless bloodshed, especially now." Ned forced himself to nod, although every instinct in him roared that there was no time for half measures. "And what do you propose, Lord Baelish?" Littlefinger arched an eyebrow, mouth curving in that sly smile. "Something prudent and swift. Let us walk." He guided Ned down the hallway, away from the guardsmen who might overhear. Though they passed torches set in sconces, the passageway seemed darker. Each flame flickered like a suspicious eye. Their footsteps carried them to a small side room seldom used, a modest library lined with dusty volumes. Littlefinger closed the door behind them. In the cramped space, the air felt thick with old parchment, ink, and the hush of secrets. There is a way, Littlefinger began quietly, to ensure that Queen Cersei and her brood are handled, a way to prevent the Lannisters from seizing power. But it will require boldness on your part, Lord Stark. A boldness you've seldom shown in these corridors. Ned's eyes narrowed. He set the parchment on a narrow table, the flicker of candlelight glinting off the unbroken seal. He had not yet shown the king's will to any man, but Baelish had a way of prying out truths and half-truths from the faintest hint. "I have a duty to Robert's true line," Ned said, voice grave. "I cannot let the realm pass to those who do not rightfully deserve it." Littlefinger tilted his head in faux sympathy. "You hold to the old ways, Lord Stark, and that's both admirable and perilous in a city like this. We both know Joffrey is not Robert's son." A soft chuckle slipped past his lips. "It's hardly a secret, if one knows which rumors to chase. Yet King's Landing runs on illusions. An exposed truth can topple 1,000 illusions in a single night, and cause a good deal of havoc, too." Ned tightened his jaw. "I will not hide the truth," he said. "When the time is right, I will name the rightful heir." "Stannis Baratheon," Littlefinger said lightly, resting a hand on the table. "You do realize he is as rigid as the Iron Throne itself. He will not be grateful if you hand him the crown. He'll see it as his by right, and he'll view you with suspicion. Stannis would be no friend to you or me, and he'd carry out his rule with a mailed fist. The realm might collapse into war. Many will suffer." Ned's eyes flared. "That may be, but the law is the law. What's right is right. Pray tell, do you think House Lannister, with all its gold, will wait quietly for Stannis to march in and claim the throne? No, they'll strike first. Then there's Renly. He's already mobilizing. He wants the throne for himself, by virtue of popularity if not strict birthright. The realm will drown in blood. Northmen. Is that what Robert wanted?" Baelish let that question hang between them. Unbidden, Ned heard the dying echoes of Robert's final words. Protect the realm. Keep the peace. There was truth in Littlefinger's words, twisted though they were. War threatened. "What then?" Ned asked, struggling not to sound weary. "What is your solution, Peter?" Littlefinger tapped his chin, eyes bright with calculation. "We seize power ourselves. Peacefully, if possible, forcibly if necessary. We use the gold cloaks, the city watch, and we secure the Red Keep. We hold Joffrey in a position of figurehead until we can smoothly transition power to a more suitable occupant of the Iron Throne. Perhaps even your own blood, if circumstances allow. Or perhaps we ensure Stannis never sets foot in the city before a certain arrangement is firmly in place." "You speak of a coup," Ned said, each word edged in discomfort. Such conspiracies felt dishonorable. Yet King's Landing was a nest of vipers, and perhaps the only way to keep his daughters safe, to keep chaos at bay, was to pluck the scorpion's stinger before it struck. "Robert would not want. Robert is dead." Peter's voice was quiet yet unyielding. "And you saw how he governed. The realm is debt-ridden, the Lannisters are entrenched, and the Tyrells lurk in the wings. You know, deep in your heart, that chaos looms. Perhaps the honorable thing this time is a well-placed dagger, not a blind parade of truth. The last time you confronted the Queen, you gave her time to prepare. You told her, 'When the king returns, I will tell him everything.' That was gallant and foolish. You see how it all ended." Ned felt his cheeks warm with shame. He had tried to warn Cersei to flee with her children. He'd wanted no harm to come to them, but also no harm to come to Robert. Instead, events had tumbled out of control. The boar, the wine, the final hunt's gone so terribly wrong. He forced a deep breath. "If you truly believe a coup is necessary, we must do it swiftly," Ned said, hardly believing the words coming from his own mouth. He clasped his hands behind his back, as if to brace himself. "But we will do this with as little bloodshed as possible." Littlefinger's lips curved. "You have my word, Lord Stark. Together we can orchestrate a smooth transition, but we must act soon. The moment Robert's death is made known, the Lannisters will make their move." The tension coiled in Ned's chest, but he nodded once. Summon the city watch. We'll need men we can trust in positions of command. I'll speak with Lord Commander Barristan as well. He's an honorable man. At that, Littlefinger's smile turned wry. Ser Barristan may be too honorable, if you get my meaning. Men like that serve the throne, not necessarily the man who stands beside it. But talk to him if you must. I suggest we keep him at our side if we can, or far away if we cannot. Ned slid the parchment into his doublet and left the room, with Littlefinger following at a distance. His heart pounded at the enormity of the step he was about to take. He was not a schemer. He was a soldier, a loyal servant of the crown, and now the crown's rightful occupant lay in the grave. Yet the moment demanded cunning. If he wanted to save his daughters and prevent a war, perhaps he had to do something unthinkable. As he strode through the corridors, thunder reverberated again. Servants were already speaking in hushed tones about the king's passing. The labyrinth of halls echoed with footsteps and murmurs, the castle seeming to pulse with the frantic heartbeat of urgent news. Ned pressed on, ignoring the swirl of questions and shocked faces. He had to reach the small council chamber before the Lannisters did. He entered that familiar room of polished oak and high windows, the long table deserted but for Varys the spider, perched in a high-backed chair with his soft, unthreatening smile. A large window looked out on the city below. King's Landing sprawled under a dark sky, lanterns glowing here and there, bright pinpricks in the gloom. "My lord," Varys said, rising with a graceful bow, "I grieve for our king, yet the realm endures. I sense you have important business to convey." His little bird-like eyes scanned Ned for any hint of emotion. "Shall I fetch the others?" Ned inclined his head curtly. "Summon them, all of them. The council must hear what I have to say." There was an edge in his voice he did not bother to hide. In short order, the others arrived. Grand Maester Pycelle, shuffling with a sorrowful air. Renly Baratheon, face set in a brittle expression that masked grief and ambition. And Littlefinger, always with that faint smirk. Missing were Cersei, who would no doubt be planning her own moves, and the Kingsguard who might still linger around Robert's body. Ned could barely keep track of the swirl of events in the corridors, but he knew time was short. He stood at the head of the table and kept his voice level, though the tension in his gut was unbearable. "Robert Baratheon has passed from this world," he began. Renly shut his eyes, but Ned could see no tears glimmering there. "He named me protector of the realm until his heir is of age." Renly lifted an eyebrow. "His heir?" He said the words as if they left a bitter taste in his mouth, for he knew as well as anyone that Ned did not consider Joffrey Roberts true heir. Indeed, Ned suspected Renly himself nurtured dreams of seizing the throne. Ned retrieved the sealed parchment, holding it out in front of them. The unbroken wax was red as blood, stamped with the Baratheon stag. He wrote it himself. "It states that I am to govern until his rightful heir is crowned. I'll read it when the queen is present." Pycelle gave a little twitch of his wrinkled chin. "We must, observe all legalities. The testament must be recognized by the council." "A formality," Littlefinger remarked smoothly. "Lord Stark has always placed the realm above his own interests." His gaze slid to Ned, full of unspoken meaning. A hush fell, broken only by the soft shuffle of Varys's silk slippers. Varys's whispery voice filled the silence. "My lords, if I may, there is the matter of Prince Joffrey. He will not be pleased to see his power delayed by any measure of regency. Queen Cersei still holds considerable sway, as do the Lannister guards in the city." Renly's lip curled. "And let us not forget, my brother Stannis is also out there, presumably gathering forces the moment he hears that the throne might be his by blood. Stannis will not wait." Ned met Renly's gaze. "Then we must secure King's Landing at once. The city watch must be commanded to preserve order." Renly's eyes gleamed. "The city watch? If you mean to hold the city by force, you'll need more than gold cloaks. We could rally men loyal to House Baratheon, my house." "A pity that Stannis is not here to weigh in," Varys offered mildly, as though pondering some minor court drama. "He is the elder brother, after all." Ned felt the noose tightening. Talk of force, alliances, claims to the throne. All of it threatened to erupt in open conflict. He sensed the others in the room measuring him, testing how far he was willing to go. When his gaze flicked to Littlefinger, Peter offered him the barest of nods. "I have given the City Watch gold for their loyalty, on behalf of our dear Lord Protector," Littlefinger said. It was an untruth that he spoke as though it were fact, but perhaps part of his plan. "I've heard they remain quite grateful for Lord Stark's generosity." Varys's eyebrows rose fractionally. How very prudent. As they say, gold wins wars, especially within city walls. Renly's jaw clenched, but he seemed to decide that, for the moment, siding with Ned might be his best chance to outmaneuver Stannis and the Lannisters. He gave a stiff nod. "Then let us ensure the safety of the city, and we can speak of who will wear the crown." Ned ended the meeting, fully aware that each of them left with private agendas. There was no telling what cunning move would come next. But for now, at least, he had made the first step toward ensuring the Lannisters did not immediately tighten their grip on the throne. After the others departed, Ned lingered with Littlefinger. Outside, the thunder had quieted, though the wind still gusted, whistling through narrow stone passages. Ned said, "See that Janos Slynt instructs his men. I want no one entering or leaving the Red Keep without my knowledge." Littlefinger bowed. "As you command, my lord. This will be an interesting night." Indeed, it was about to be a night that would decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Ned left, heart heavy with doubts. He had joined forces with a man he did not trust, to seize control of a city that seethed with duplicity. But the alternative was war, one that would place his daughters in even greater peril. At least now he had a chance to act first. He returned to his chambers, where he found Arya pacing like a restless direwolf. Sansa sat in a chair, eyes rimmed red. The news of Robert's death had reached them. Arya turned quickly upon seeing him, her face etched with concern rather than sorrow. "Father, what's happening? The guards outside are saying that Joffrey is to be king. Sansa thinks it's wonderful, but she's a fool. That boy is cruel. He'd sooner hurt a pup than feed it." "Arya!" Sansa cried, offended tears brimming. "He is our my betrothed. He'll be a good king." Ned laid a hand on Arya's shoulder to calm her. "Girls, I need you to stay in these rooms. Keep the doors barred. Let in no one but those I trust. This castle isn't safe." Arya's expression hardened. "I can fight," she said. "If the Lannisters come, I'll show them Needle's Point." Ned's heart twisted with a mix of pride and sadness. "I know your courage, my little wolf, but I command you to keep yourself safe. Sansa, you must do the same. Promise me." Sansa averted her eyes, confusion flickering across her face. "I promise, father." Ned kissed each of them on the brow. He doubted he would have a chance to rest that night. Danger pressed against the very walls of the castle. Outside, the corridors bustled with men-at-arms, courtiers, and servants, all in a whirl of panic and rumor. "The king is dead." They repeated the words like a dark mantra. He found his way to the royal apartments, half expecting to see Lannister guards. Instead, he encountered Ser Meryn Trant standing watch with a cold expression. Ned demanded an audience with the queen. Meryn hesitated, but eventually let him through. Inside, Cersei was dressed in a dark green gown embroidered with golden lions, as if already in mourning. She stood by a tall window overlooking the courtyard. "Lord Stark," she said, turning slightly, her golden hair falling loose over her shoulders. There was a certain tension in her posture, as though she balanced on a knife's edge between sorrow and fury. "Your Grace," Ned said. He made a small bow. Part of him wanted to lash out, to accuse her of the lies that had led to this day, but he reined in his temper. "I trust you've heard the news of King Robert's passing." "I have," she said curtly, voice hushed. "I do not claim to have loved him in the end, but he was my husband, and he was a better father to Joffrey than I could have hoped these last few years." Ned felt a spasm of pity, quickly overshadowed by the memory of her betrayal. He offered the sealed parchment. The king left this, his final decree, naming me protector of the realm until his rightful heir is crowned. Cersei's lips tensed. Joffrey is the rightful heir, and I expect you to honor that. As your king commanded. Ned's pulse hammered. We have no intention of denying Joffrey his rights. He lied through gritted teeth, remembering the plan. Only to ensure a smooth transition. The City Watch is under our command, Your Grace. We must keep the peace until Coronation Day. She studied him, her eyes like green ice. Why do I sense you are more dangerous now than ever, Lord Stark? You wear your honor on your sleeve, yet behind it, I smell steel. She took a step closer, voice low enough that only he could hear. You tried to warn me once. Are you now here to threaten me? Ned summoned all his will to keep his face impassive. I do only what's needed to keep the realm from splitting apart. Remember this, she said, gaze unwavering. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground. He left her then, the tension thick enough to choke on. As he emerged, he found Littlefinger hovering in the corridor, wearing a neutral expression. How did she take it? Peter asked mildly. Ned shook his head. As expected. She knows. I cannot hide anything from that woman. Littlefinger nodded, leading him away. This will be a delicate business. In truth, we have an opportunity. If we keep Joffrey quietly under guard, we control the throne. The question is, what do we do with the queen? Ned's jaw tightened. She must be confined as well. If we're staging a coup, let us do it swiftly, before she can flee or strike first. Peter's smile was faintly amused. Very well. I've made certain preparations to neutralize the Lannister foothold in the Red Keep. They stepped into the courtyard, where a chill wind tugged at Ned's cloak. The sky above was a smoky swirl of clouds, half lit by the moon's silver glow. City Watchmen in golden cloaks were forming ranks, a hush among them as they waited for orders. Janos Slynt, captain of the City Watch, approached, giving an obsequious bow to Ned and a respectful nod to Littlefinger. My lords, said Slynt, in a voice that quavered with self-importance. We're assembled, as you commanded. Shall we place men around the Red Keep or throughout the city? Littlefinger opened his mouth, but Ned spoke first. The Red Keep, every entrance, every exit. None but my household, Lord Baelish, or the Queen's immediate retinue may move freely. Confine the Queen to her apartments if you can do so without bloodshed. Take Prince Joffrey into protective custody. Gently. We don't want the boy harmed. Once that's done, secure Myrcella and Tommen as well. We can't have them used as hostages by the Lannisters. Slynt gave a stiff bow. Yes, my lord. It will be done at once. He set about giving orders, and the gold cloaks dispersed into the shadows of the keep. Ned felt the weight of what he was doing crush his shoulders. This was treason, a direct assault against the Queen and her children, albeit an assault meant to prevent a larger war. He whispered to Littlefinger, No unnecessary killing, Peter. If even one child is harmed, I'll... Peter raised a hand. Fear not. I prefer deals and gold to swords. But this is no trifling matter, Ned. He exhaled softly, looking almost weary. The night will be long. They waited in the courtyard, the minutes dragging past like hours. From somewhere in the castle, a shout echoed. Steel clanged against steel. Ned's heart lurched. Then the gates opened, and a squad of gold cloaks emerged, half leading, half dragging two figures. By torchlight, Ned recognized them. Ser Meryn Trant and Queen Cersei. Meryn was pinned by two watchmen who gripped his arms, and the Queen walked with her head held high. Yet in her eyes Ned read shock and seething rage. Behind them strode another group, escorting the stunned forms of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. The children looked frightened, especially Myrcella. Tommen was pale, biting his lip, tears threatening. Joffrey, meanwhile, looked outraged. Unhand me, he cried, voice cracking. I am your king. I'll have your heads. Ned glanced at Littlefinger. A swift nod from Peter, and the watchmen relaxed their grip ever so slightly but kept firm control. Cersei's gaze lit on Ned like the sharpened point of a dagger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Thunder rumbled softly again, and in the torchlight her hair looked like molten gold. Ned stepped forward, voice low and measured. "For your safety, your grace. The king is dead, and the city is unsettled. We are placing you under protective guard until such time as the succession is resolved. The realm must have a protector." Joffrey spat. "I am the king. I should give the orders." He tried to shake free, but a guard held him fast. Ned felt a pang, remembering the vow he had made to Robert. But Robert's illusions about his children were just that, illusions. He knelt before the boy. "Your father named me protector until his rightful heir is crowned. Once the council determines the correct line of succession, you will be treated with all respect." "It's my throne," Joffrey howled. "My throne. Mother, do something." Cersei's cheeks flamed, and she turned cold eyes on Littlefinger, as if guessing that this entire plan bore his subtle fingerprints. Peter merely tilted his head politely, a gesture that offered neither apology nor explanation. "My lord, this is madness," she said. "The realm will never stand for it. Tywin Lannister will hear of this. He will not allow such treason." Ned felt the uneasy churn of fear in his gut. Indeed, Tywin Lannister was a man to be feared, Warden of the West, head of House Lannister, and cunning beyond measure. But that was a challenge for another day. "For now, your grace, you must remain in the Red Keep. I hope you'll cooperate so that no harm comes to you or your children. Guards, escort them inside." The watchman led the queen and the royal children back into the keep. Cersei's head remained unbowed, though Ned saw tension in her jaw. She murmured something to Joffrey, trying to soothe him, even as her face betrayed her fury. Ned turned to Littlefinger. "We must take the throne room. I'll summon the council again at once. We'll read Robert's will, and we will formally declare me regent until the matter of succession is resolved." He paused, swallowing his distaste for what he was about to say. "We must also alert the other major houses: Stark, Tully, Arryn, Baratheon, Greyjoy, Tyrell, Martell. If we move quickly enough, we can hold the city and force them to negotiate." Peter nodded with an air of satisfaction. "What of Stannis?" "Invite him to come at once," Ned said, though the words tasted bitter. "We will see if he truly holds the rightful claim. And if it's indeed proven that he is Robert's lawful heir, then we will hand him the throne." Baelish arched an eyebrow, as if impressed by Ned's continued sense of duty. "You would truly give up power so easily, after grasping it?" Ned bristled at the implication that he was grasping power. "I don't seek the throne for myself, Peter." Littlefinger replied, non-committal. "Then let us move." They strode into the keep, the thunder's echoing rumble fading behind them. Flanked by men of the city watch, they navigated torchlit corridors until they reached the massive doors of the throne room. The high hall was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the floor of polished stone. At the far end, the Iron Throne rose in all its jagged, menacing glory. The swords of 1,000 conquered enemies fused together in a warped seat of power. The hush in the throne room was broken only by the soft footsteps of the guards. Ned stared at that twisted throne of swords. Even from a distance, it looked sinister, an uncomfortable seat from which to rule a realm that refused to be tamed. He recalled Robert's complaining, the times he'd said the throne made his back ache. Now Robert was dead, and the throne belonged to no one. Littlefinger cleared his throat. "Shall we have the council gather here? Appearances matter, after all." Ned nodded. "Yes, let it be done here, for all to see." Soon, the chamber began to fill with a smattering of courtiers, anxious servants, and the members of the small council. Grand Maester Pycelle arrived, wringing his hands. Varys slipped in like a shadow, wearing a look of mild curiosity. Renly Baratheon entered with a troop of guards wearing the stag sigil, his face set in grim determination. Ser Barristan Selmy, clad in white Kingsguard armor, arrived as well, looking lost and mournful, as if still reeling from the king's death. Ned summoned all eyes to him. He stood on the steps before the Iron Throne, flanked by a line of gold cloaks. Littlefinger hovered near him, seemingly content to let Ned do the talking while he maneuvered behind the scenes. The torches along the walls cast flickering orange light, and in that shifting glow, the tension in the room was palpable. "My lords," Ned began, letting his voice echo off the high stone walls. "King Robert Baratheon is dead. May the gods give him rest." A murmur passed through the assembled crowd. "Before he died, he drafted this will and placed upon me the duty of protector of the realm until his rightful heir is crowned." He broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. His eyes skimmed the words one last time, and he found he could scarcely draw breath. Could so few lines of ink truly change the fate of the Seven Kingdoms? Nevertheless, he began to read aloud, "I, Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of my name." He recited each sentence in a calm, measured tone. The final part read, "I appoint Eddard of the House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, to rule as protector of the realm until my heir come of age." When he finished, the hall was deathly silent. Every face was turned toward him, some with hope, some with suspicion, some with veiled fury. Renly stepped forward. "And that rightful heir is Joffrey Baratheon, yes?" He glanced around, as though daring anyone to deny it. Many eyes darted to Ned. Ned took a careful breath. "The will says my heir." A faint ripple ran through the hall. "We have reason to question whether Joffrey is the king's trueborn son." At that, a louder murmuring broke out. No one had dared say such a thing publicly, but many had whispered it. Ser Barristan Selmy looked aghast. "My lord, this is a grave accusation." Ned inclined his head in respect. "I do not make it lightly, Ser Barristan, nor do I wish to offend your many years of service. But the evidence is too strong to ignore. I am summoning Lord Stannis Baratheon to King's Landing to present his claim and to submit to a thorough examination of the matter." Renly folded his arms over his chest. "Stannis? That humorless statue of a man? My brother has the rightful claim by birth, yes, but the realm will not love him. This city will revolt if you place Stannis on that throne." Pycelle murmured something about the importance of bloodlines, but Varys interjected in that quiet, purring voice. "Does the realm truly love any king, my lord? Fear might suffice." A swirl of voices rose in the chamber. The tension crackled, and it took Ned lifting a hand to regain order. "Until we have clarity, I shall act as regent. The queen and her children are under guard for their own protection. No harm will come to them." He shot a pointed look at Littlefinger, whose expression remained unreadable. "I have promised Robert that we would spare them." Barristan's normally kindly face hardened, as though torn. "You have placed our queen under arrest? This is unthinkable." Ned's gut twisted again. He had always admired the old knight's unwavering sense of honor. "Ser Barristan, we must keep the peace. Once we know the truth of the succession, if Joffrey is proven to be Robert's trueborn son, he will be crowned. If not, the crown will pass to another Baratheon." Renly's lips curled in a half-smile. "We shall see, then." At that moment, the doors burst open, and men in red cloaks poured in. Lannister men-at-arms, faces grim and swords half-drawn. Ned felt his heart jolt, but the gold cloaks rushed to meet them, spears bristling. For a moment, it looked as though steel would clash against steel right there in front of the Iron Throne. Then a voice shouted from behind the Lannisters, "Stand down!" Jaime Lannister strode into the throne room, wearing gleaming armor. His golden hair caught the torchlight, and his smirk was as brazen as ever. Ned recalled the day Jaime had ambushed him in the streets, the day Ned's men had died. The memory stoked his anger, but he reined it in. Jaime swept the hall with his gaze, catching sight of Ned on the steps and the ring of guards around him. "So, the rumors are true," he said in a mocking drawl. "Ned Stark has seized the city." Ned tensed. "Lord Tywin's men have no place here," he said, voice cold. "King Robert is dead, and until the succession is determined, I am protector of the realm. Lay down your arms, Ser Jaime. I will grant you safe conduct back to your father, or you may remain in the Red Keep as a guest. But I will not allow you to raise arms in the throne room." Jaime's pale green eyes flicked over the crowd. He saw Ser Barristan, who looked on in shock, and Renly, arms folded. He saw Littlefinger, who was watching him with an inscrutable smile. Finally, Jaime offered a half-laugh. "Ned Stark, always the honorable one. You took my sister prisoner, I hear, and her children, too. Perhaps I should start removing parts of you in retaliation. Or should I say, the parts you have left." His grin was sharp and mirthless. Ned's hand closed around the hilt of his sword, but he did not draw. "I have no wish to spill blood here. Yield, Jaime." For a moment, the Kingslayer's grin faltered, replaced by raw hatred. Ned sensed a tremor in the air. He remembered too well how Jaime had murdered King Aerys on this very spot. How he had been discovered sitting on the Iron Throne afterwards, casual as a cat in a sunbeam. Jaime was dangerous, reckless, and proud. If he attacked now, a massacre could ensue. Then one of Jaime's men murmured that the City Watch was out in force and that the Red Keep was controlled by Stark men. Jaime's face hardened with the realization that he was outnumbered. He held up a gauntlet hand to his men. "Stand down," he ordered with venom in his voice. A wave of relief swept through Ned, though he remained on guard. Jaime sheathed his sword with a metallic hiss. "I will stay, Lord Stark, as your guest. But hear me well, my father will come. He will come with an army of 20,000, and he will demand my sister be freed and my nephew crowned." Ned studied him quietly. "If that is his wish, he can come and negotiate. Until then, Ser Jaime, you remain in King's Landing without the privilege of commanding armed men. Make no move to harm the city or its people, and you'll remain unharmed yourself." Jaime just sneered. "As you say, Lord Protector." He gave a mocking bow, then stepped aside. His men hesitated, unsure, but eventually they, too, sheathed swords. The tension in the room ebbed slightly, though it remained poised on a knife's edge. Ned gestured to the gold cloaks. "Show them to quarters in the Tower of the Hand. Under guard." He expected Jaime to protest, but Jaime merely fixed him with a cold look, turned on his heel and strode out, his red-cloaked retinue in tow. Once they were gone, the hush felt like a heavy weight on every chest. Renly finally let out a breath. "Well, that's done. But we are one step away from war with House Lannister." Ned nodded grimly. "It was always likely unless they yielded, but they'll not dare attack openly until they gather their forces. By then, we'll have either consolidated or we'll all be dead." He paused, letting the hush fill the chamber again. "Council dismissed. Return to your seats. Varys, see that ravens are sent to Dragonstone for Stannis, to the Eyrie for Lady Lysa, and to every major lord in the realm. I will pen the letters myself." The eunuch bowed with a slight rustle of robes. "As you will, my lord." Renly lingered as the others drifted away, turning to Ned with a calculating gaze. "If you do this, truly press Stannis' claim, you will have to fight half the realm. The Reach will not bend willingly to Stannis, nor will the West, obviously. The Stormlands might, but not all lords love him. Stannis has little love for them in return." Ned gave Renly a weary look. "What would you suggest, Lord Renly? That we place you on the throne instead?" The younger Baratheon's cheeks reddened slightly, but he remained calm. "If the good of the realm is your true aim, you might consider it. I'm a Baratheon as well, and I can charm the lords far better than my brother. We can avert war." Ned felt a flicker of temptation. He knew Renly was popular, affable, and might indeed gain wide support. But it flew in the face of law and legitimacy. "I cannot. Stannis is older. The crown should be his if Joffrey is proved illegitimate." Renly exhaled, frustrated. "Then may the gods help us." He cast one last glance at the Iron Throne before leaving. Finally, Ned stood alone by the great chair of melted swords, the torches burning low, shadows stretching across the floor. He felt as though the entire realm balanced on his shoulders. On this very night, with Robert's body not yet cold, he had orchestrated a bloodless coup, at least thus far. The Queen, the royal children, Jaime Lannister, all under watch. The city was in his hands. But for how long could he hold it? He heard a soft step behind him and turned to see Littlefinger. "Well done, Lord Stark," Peter said, voice smooth as silk. "We have the city, and no war was required." Yet, Ned's mouth twitched in a wry smile. "I've compromised so much already. I feel as though I stand on shifting sands." Peter shrugged, that small, knowing smile never leaving his lips. "Sometimes, to do good, one must do a little evil on the way. Now, we must keep our hold firm. The Lannisters will not remain docile for long." Ned gazed at the twisted spikes of the Iron Throne, remembering Robert's tales of how uncomfortable it was. In that moment, he finally understood why. "We'll maintain our guard. Alert me if there's any movement from the west." Littlefinger bowed with a flourish. "As you wish, my lord. The game is yours to lose now." He vanished into the shadows, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts in the ancient hall. The flicker of torchlight glinted off metal swords, making them gleam like hungry eyes. In a single day, he had stepped from the role of Hand of the King to something far more powerful and far more precarious. Up in the high rafters, a raven fluttered, disturbed by the movements below. Ned thought of the messages he would soon send, summoning Stannis, summoning the North to stand behind him, perhaps, encouraging the other great lords to keep peace. He prayed that they would see reason, but he feared the clarion call of war would echo across the Seven Kingdoms before reason took root. As Ned left the throne room, the words of Cersei Lannister echoed in his mind. "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die." He had entered the game now, conspiring with Peter Baelish to place the realm in a stranglehold before the Lannisters could do the same. He'd done it to avert bloodshed, to protect his children. But as the night stretched on, he could not help but wonder if there was any path left to remain the honorable man he had always tried to be, or if the demands of this city would swallow him whole, just as they had so many before. Still, he was Ned Stark of Winterfell. He had the North behind him, and he had taken the first step in a plan that he prayed would save more lives than it cost. In his chambers, with dawn only a few hours off, he found no sleep waiting for him, only the silent gaze of his sword propped against the wall. Dawn would break soon, and with it, the news of the coup would ripple through King's Landing. Power had shifted, but peace was far from assured. He sat at his writing desk, quill in hand, and penned the letters he had promised. A dozen ravens would take flight in the morning, carrying the words of Eddard Stark, protector of the realm. Outside, a pale hint of light touched the horizon, and he felt the dread coil in his stomach. War might yet come, but at least he had done something. As he sealed each letter with the dire wolf of House Stark, he made a silent plea. "Let this be enough. Let the gods grant us mercy." Yet the old gods and the new were never so easily swayed. Ned Stark, unaccustomed to the intricacies of the game, had taken his first, decisive move on a grand board, and all he could do now was face the consequences when they came. Dawn broke gray and lifeless over King's Landing, the pale sky muted by a low haze that smelled faintly of the Blackwater's brine. The sun, hidden behind shifting clouds, cast no warmth upon the Red Keep's battlements. Yet, all across the city, the bells began their doleful toll. King Robert Baratheon was dead, and the news spilled into the streets like oil on water. It clung to corners and alleyways, igniting speculation and dread in every tavern, market stall, and wharf. Inside the Red Keep, Eddard Stark sat before his desk, having spent the remainder of the night drafting and sealing letters. His eyes felt gritty and raw from exhaustion, and the day's tasks had scarcely begun. He pushed a fresh parchment aside, folded it, and dripped a swirl of wax upon the crease. Pressing his signet ring, he stamped the dire wolf of House Stark into the cooling red puddle. One more summons to one more lord. Outside his windows, the yard was alive with motion. Golden-cloaked watchmen posted at every door, Lannister men under guard, the usual scurrying of servants shadowed by the tension that weighed on the castle as heavily as the leaden sky. Ned had insisted that nobody pass in or out of the Red Keep without his express permission. Horses were stabled, wagons halted, and visitors who ventured to the gates were turned away, left to wonder at the swirl of confusion. A sharp rap came at his door. Jory Castle's voice floated through. "My lord, it's Ser Barristan Selmy." Ned rose, steeling himself. "Enter." Ser Barristan stepped in, clad in pristine white cloak and plate, and behind him hovered Jory. The old knight inclined his head with grave respect. "Lord Stark." Ned offered him a seat with a gesture, but Barristan remained standing, helm tucked under one arm, lines of worry etched deeply into his face. "I received your summons," he said. "Though I had planned to come anyway." Ned exhaled slowly. "I know how this all must appear, Ser Barristan. I regret the subterfuge, the arrests, yet we had no other path." Barristan's face was a complicated map of conflicting loyalties. "I served King Robert most of my life," he said quietly. "I served the Targaryens before him. I've never considered myself a great statesman, nor a juggler of claims and lineages. I swore an oath to defend the king, whoever wears the crown." "The king is gone," Ned said, voice hushed. He had not slept since hearing Robert's final, ragged breaths. The sense of finality still weighed on him like a physical burden. "I have Robert's last will and testament, naming me protector of the realm. You heard it read yourself, last night in the throne room." Barristan glanced aside. "Aye, that part one do not dispute. But the question of the heir, all these rumors." His expression turned pained. "If Joffrey is the king's trueborn son, he must take the throne, and our oaths bind us to serve him. If he is not, then, by all the laws of gods and men, the rightful heir would be Lord Stannis." Ned set his jaw. He wanted more than anything to speak plainly with the old knight. Ser Barristan had always reminded him of the simpler virtues: loyalty, martial skill, a sense of duty so deep it bordered on blindness. "I cannot prove Joffrey's illegitimacy to you this moment, Ser Barristan, but soon we will have that proof. Documents from the city's records, books, the testimonies of men who have witnessed things in secret, and physical resemblances that can no longer be ignored." Barristan's gaze flicked to the letter Ned had just sealed, the direwolf imprint glistening in the candlelight. "And so we wait for Lord Stannis. If you name him king upon his arrival, you will expect me to bend the knee, I suppose." "I would hope you continue to serve the throne," Ned said, choosing his words carefully. "Your vow does not change, Ser Barristan. You swore to protect the realm from harm. Right now, the realm teeters on the brink of war. If we do nothing, House Lannister will rally half their forces to put Joffrey on the throne, an act that might be righteous if Joffrey were truly Robert's son, but which becomes treasonous if he is not. The realm would tear itself apart. My duty is to prevent that." Barristan said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a tone that suggested he was trying to grasp an intangible thread, he said, "If the queen is under guard, if the Kingslayer is likewise detained, the Lannisters will not take this calmly. Lord Tywin is no man to simply yield. War may still come." Ned lowered his gaze to his hands. They felt stiff, almost numb. "I know," he murmured. "But better to hold the city now than to let them seize it from us with bloodshed later. We stand the best chance of compelling Lord Tywin to treat if we have his daughter and grandchildren safe. No matter how prideful he may be, he will not risk the children's lives. Not at least without pause." Barristan nodded gravely. "For the sake of the realm, I hope you are right." Then he straightened. "I will remain. Let it be known that I am not a turncloak. I will guard the king's children, no matter who they are. I will do so with my last breath if need be. Give me your leave, Lord Protector." Ned released a slow breath, relieved. "Thank you, Ser Barristan. You have my leave. Speak with the city watch about your movements. Some are uncertain how to treat the Kingsguard now that we've placed the Queen under guard. We want no accidental conflicts." Barristan gave a stiff bow and departed, leaving Ned alone again with Jory. Ned stared at the sealed letters on his desk, at least a dozen. Dispatches to the Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Westerlands, to Winterfell, and to Dragonstone for Stannis. He would send them out in separate flights of ravens, to ensure that not all would be lost if some were intercepted. Jory cleared his throat gently. "You trust Ser Barristan? As much as I trust anyone in this nest of vipers," Ned replied. "He's an honorable man, but his loyalty to the throne is absolute. If we prove ourselves false in word or deed, he'll turn on us. We must tread carefully." Jory nodded, then ventured, "Should I rouse the men to stand watch outside your chambers? The Lannisters will hate you for this." "They already do," Ned said with a heavy sigh. "Yes, post double guard. And see to it that Arya and Sansa remain within the Tower of the Hand, guarded as well." When Jory left, Ned stood and paced to the window. Down in the yard, city watchmen walked to and fro, halberds catching the cold morning light. The wind carried the muffled clang of the blacksmith's hammer from across the courtyard, and in the distance, over the city walls, the sprawl of King's Landing was beginning to stir awake to the day's routine. Above the rooftops, columns of pale smoke rose. From the far harbor, a few sails drifted into view, but none would dock at the palace wharf without explicit permission. Ned closed his eyes, remembering Winterfell's crisp air, the smell of pine and fresh fallen snow. The memory felt as distant as a dream. Here, in King's Landing, the air was perpetually thick with tension, and it would only worsen in the days to come. He left his solar and descended the winding steps into the corridor, headed for the great hall. Sleep tugged at his limbs, but he pressed on, aware that any sign of weakness now would invite immediate challenges. The corridor leading toward the throne room was lined with watchers, men loyal to Ned's cause, if not personally, then at least loyal to his gold. Littlefinger had seen to that. He caught himself tensing at the mere thought of Peter Baelish. Never in all his days had he expected to conspire with such a man, to owe him for a careful coup. And yet, necessity made strange bedfellows. In the hall outside the great council chamber, Peter stood waiting for him, wearing a slim-fitting tunic of dark green satin, the mockingbird pin on his breast. He looked as though he had slept comfortably, if indeed he had slept at all. "My lord," Littlefinger greeted with a faint bow, his tone quiet. "The bells ring on and on. It's enough to drive a man to madness." "They toll for Robert," Ned said, stepping past. "They will toll until sundown, I believe." "Yes, well, I find extended mourning tends to dull the city's spirit. Sober men ask sober questions, and we don't always want the answers to come too quickly. But I suppose we cannot muzzle the Septons." Ned eyed him. "Have you heard any word of House Lannister's movements outside the city?" Baelish strolled beside him, the soles of his boots echoing off the marble floor. "A whisper from one of my informers suggests Lord Tywin is gathering forces at Casterly Rock. Nothing definite, but it seems the bannermen are being called. He's far from idle." Ned grimaced. "He'll march eventually, if we don't find a resolution. If I know Tywin, he'll want to wait for the right moment. He might test our strength with forays led by Gregor Clegane or some such monster. Or he might simply starve us of trade if he can. The Gold Road is a valuable artery. Cut it, and watch the city flail." The notion weighed on Ned, though he kept his voice steady. He'd harm his own seat of power by cutting trade. The Lannisters gain mightily from commerce here. He might be willing to sacrifice short-term coin for a crown upon Joffrey's head, or, failing that, for the safe return of his daughter and her children. Let us not forget that a Lannister always pays his debts. Ned suppressed a shudder, stepping through the tall double doors into the council chamber. Inside, several lords and officials loitered, some bleary-eyed, some tense. Varys was there, perched lightly at the table, Grand Maester Pycelle nodding in half-doze, and Renly Baratheon leaning against a far wall, arms folded. At the sight of Ned, the conversation died. Ned took his seat at the head of the long table. "My lords, the ravens will fly this morning with official word of the king's passing and my appointment as Lord Protector. May the gods grant King Robert rest. As for the realm, we must ensure stability above all else." Renly, still wearing the black garb of mourning, let out a soft breath. "Stability, a fine word. But I heard the boy screaming in the Queen's apartments last night. Joffrey does not fancy himself a prisoner. If word spreads that we've locked the rightful heir in gilded chains, it hasn't been proven he is rightful, Ned said, forcing calm. I've explained that at length already. Renly's mouth flattened. Yes, you have, but the city won't stand still forever. The small folk want a crowned king. They don't understand talk of bastardy and genealogies. They understand only that Robert is gone and the Lannisters are powerful. We must give them a measure of reassurance or risk riots. Pycelle lifted his ancient eyes. You propose to hold a coronation, Lord Renly? For whom? Silence stretched. Renly exhaled again, glancing at Ned. If you will not crown Joffrey, then the next in line, by your argument, would be Stannis. He sounded less than enthused about his older brother's claim. Yet Stannis is not here, nor do we know precisely when he will arrive or if he's already begun to gather a fleet. You might consider. Ned fixed him with a calm, warning stare. I've considered. I will not break the law of succession. If Joffrey is proven false, then Stannis shall be king. Renly's lip twitched, as though he found the idea distasteful, but he said nothing more. Varys cleared his throat delicately. We must also think of alliances, Lord Stark. The Tyrells, for instance. They hold the breadbasket of the realm. If they do not bend the knee to your regency, many in the city will go hungry. And if they align with the Lannisters... He left the thought hanging in the air like a dagger. Ned leaned back in his seat, feeling the ache in his bones from the sleepless night. I'll send a letter to Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden. I'll remind him of the vows he made to King Robert. The Tyrells chafed under the Baratheon dynasty after the rebellion, but they recognized Robert's rule well enough for many years. Littlefinger's voice slid into the conversation. The Tyrells want power. Marriages, alliances, honeyed words. Sooner or later, they'll want to seat a Tyrell close to or on the throne. If Stannis is unmarried, and he is, being a widower if memory serves, he might secure that alliance. But Stannis is not known for charming negotiations. Renly let out a short laugh. Stannis wooing Margaery Tyrell? I can scarcely picture it. Pycelle stirred. A union of necessity, perhaps. Yet Stannis is the very spirit of formality. He might see marriage as a duty to secure loyalty. If the Tyrells are wise, they might accept such a match. The realm could unify under that banner. Possibly. Ned listened, unsettled. He had enough to worry about without orchestrating marriages. For now, we focus on sending word. We must show the realm that King's Landing is secure, that the Red Keep is not in chaos. The funeral rites for King Robert will be conducted in the Great September in 3 days. Let that be a sign of continuity. The city can watch their departed king laid to rest. We will keep Joffrey confined, but not ill-treated. I suspect the Queen will demand to attend, as will the other children. Renly's expression grew cautious. You plan to let them out of their gilded cage that day? All it takes is one moment of distraction for Lannister loyalists to spirit them away, or for the Queen to rally the crowd. Ned nodded. We'll have to do it carefully, but to deny the Queen the right to mourn publicly would turn many hearts against us. Let her weep for her husband. Let her stand in the sept with Joffrey, but we'll have the gold cloaks ringed around them, and we'll show the city that the realm is still governed by law. Varys's soft voice chimed in. A very fine line, my lord, but perhaps you are right. Appearances can be as powerful as swords. See to the arrangements, Ned said, rising. I'll sign any necessary orders. Is there anything else that demands immediate attention? The council exchanged glances. Littlefinger cleared his throat. There is the matter of the royal treasury, my lord. We're deeply in debt, to the Iron Bank of Bravos, to House Lannister, to others. We must address how to keep the city fed and the guards paid. Without gold, the city watch's loyalty might waver. Ned could not help a weary sigh. Yes, address the coin as best you can, Peter. I'll not hinder you. Just keep me informed. Find a way to maintain the city's daily affairs. We must not let the small folk starve or riot. One by one, the councillors took their leave, the hush returning to the hall. Ned stayed behind for a moment, letting the tension seep out in a ragged breath. Was he truly becoming a man who compromised with cunning serpents simply to hold power and avoid war? He told himself it was for the good of the realm, that this was what Robert would have wanted, peace and stability. Yet a seed of doubt burned in his belly, for the cost was high. At length he departed as well, determined to see to his daughters. He found Sansa in her chamber, seated by the window with her embroidery left undone in her lap. She stared out at the courtyard, her red gold hair catching the morning light. The normal flush of her cheeks was replaced by a pallor that told Ned she'd either been weeping or stewing in confusion. Arya was not there, but Sansa's maid hovered by the far door, worry in her eyes. "Leave us," Ned said softly. The maid dropped a curtsy and slipped out. He approached Sansa, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She startled slightly, as if drawn out of a reverie. "Father," she murmured. "How are you faring?" he asked. She swallowed, lowering her gaze. "I don't know. Everything seems so strange. The king is dead. Joffrey isn't. Is it true you've locked him away?" Ned settled himself on a stool beside her. He steeled himself for her reaction, which would no doubt be heartbreak. "I've placed the queen and her children under guard, yes. The city is in a precarious position, Sansa. I can't allow." She stood abruptly, her eyes blazing with an emotion that looked like betrayal. "You can't allow me to see him? He was to be my betrothed. I know he can be cruel sometimes, but Mother always said these matches were about unity. Am I never to speak with him again?" Ned sighed. He was torn between wanting to protect her and wanting to show her the truth of the situation. "My sweet girl, Joffrey may not be who you think he is. There are questions about his parentage. I heard." Her voice trembled with equal parts anger and confusion. "Is it truly your place to decide such things, Father? If he's not the rightful heir, fine, but I can't believe the boy I was pledged to is evil." "He's not your betrothed anymore." The words left his mouth more sharply than he intended. "I would not have you married to him if what I suspect proves true." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them in check with a shuddering breath. "You'll keep me locked up here, then? While everyone in the city gossips about me and calls me the wolf girl who betrayed her prince." Ned reached for her hand, but she jerked away. Guilt settled heavily on him. "I only want to keep you safe," he murmured. "The realm is in turmoil. If the Lannisters gain the upper hand, they might use you. If war breaks out, you'd be an obvious hostage." She looked out the window again, tears shining. Everything was so simple before. At Winterfell, we never had to fear such things. The songs always said knights and lords were honorable, that princesses found happiness in marriage. Now, her throat closed around the words. Ned wanted to comfort her, to promise that all would be well, but a lie would serve no one. "Trust me, Sansa. I will see you safe home soon. Just abide by my words for now." She did not reply, merely sank back into her chair, her face turned away. After a moment, Ned left, his heart leaden. He found Arya in a small courtyard near the Tower of the Hand, practicing her footwork with needle. Syrio Farrell stood off to one side, arms folded, giving her sharp corrections in his Bravosi accent. "Syrio," Ned called quietly. Arya turned mid-lunge, surprise lighting her face. She lowered the slender blade, which was not much more than a child's sword but still lethal enough in skilled hands. "My lord," Syrio greeted with a respectful incline of his head. Ned's gaze flicked over Arya, who wore a sheen of sweat on her brow. He realized with a pang that if all was normal, he'd be proud, or perhaps anxious that she was training too hard. But now, a looming dread overshadowed everything. "Arya, I want you to remain in our quarters or here in this courtyard. Do not roam the castle alone." Arya's eyes narrowed. "Am I a prisoner too?" Ned shook his head, forcing gentleness. "No, but there's danger. We have the city watch to keep order, but I can't risk you wandering into places where the Lannisters or their allies might cause harm." Promise me, Arya. Stay within the Tower of the Hand or in the yard if Syrio accompanies you. She hesitated, then nodded. I promise. Syrio watched them both with a neutral expression, but there was a flicker of understanding in his dark eyes. The water dancer listens, but also she must keep her spirit. Fear cuts deeper than swords, does it not? Arya brightened a little at that, though her expression remained wary. Ned left them to their practice. He continued through the labyrinthine corridors, eventually emerging onto a balcony that overlooked the city. His breath caught at the enormity of it all. Thousands upon thousands of rooftops, chimneys belching smoke, winding streets teeming with life. The sound of bells persisted in the far distance. Here was a realm that needed guiding or it would collapse into chaos. Could Ned truly do it without losing himself, and without unleashing a war? A polite cough drew his attention. Peter Baelish stood behind him, silent as a cat. The missives are ready to be dispatched, my lord. Janos Slint awaits your final orders. He'll see the ravens off or you can, whichever you prefer. Then let's be done, Ned said, turning from the view. Baelish accompanied him down the steps to the rookery, where maesters fussed over cages and scrolls. Ned carefully affixed H's seals to each letter, then gave them to the maesters, who tied them to the slender legs of waiting ravens. One by one, the birds were released, winging off into the cloudy sky. The last raven was bound for Dragonstone, carrying the letter addressed to Stannis Baratheon. As that black shape disappeared over the battlements, Ned felt a chill. It was as though he'd cast the realm's fate to the winds. What if Stannis came with an army at his back? That could still provoke open conflict, if the Lannisters contested him. Or what if the letters arrived too late, and Tywin Lannister moved first? He turned to Baelish. We've done all we can for now. We wait for replies. Littlefinger's eyes gleamed with that cool, calculating light. We wait, yes, but there are more subtle tasks to consider. The city whispers day and night, and we need to guide those whispers. Meaning we can shape the narrative. We can let it be known that you are simply following the king's will, that you hold the queen and her children in comfortable lodgings, with all courtesy, that you have sworn to keep order, and no harm will come to any unless they attempt treason. The small folk love a strong regent who promises peace. Ned pressed his lips together. I will not stoop to spreading lies. No lies, merely the truth repeated frequently. Littlefinger said, smirking. In my experience, the best propaganda is the truth, carefully framed and told well. Let us keep the city calm, so that if Tywin Lannister tries to brand you usurpers, half the realm might question him. Ned exhaled. Very well. Do what must be done. That evening, Ned stood before the door to Cersei's chambers, flanked by 2 gold cloaks. He had not yet spoken with the queen alone since the moment of her arrest the night before. As he approached, he noticed subtle changes. The bright Lannister banners had been removed, replaced with plain cloth. The corridor was heavily guarded. The door that once stood open and welcoming, so that courtiers might come and go, was barred, and a single flickering lantern lit the hall. The guards saluted stiffly. One of them unlocked the door at Ned's nod. Inside, Cersei waited. She wore a simple black gown embroidered with golden lions at the cuffs, though it was subdued compared to her usual finery. Her hair spilled over her shoulders, brushed to a shine, but there was a hardness in her eyes that belied any show of mourning. Joffrey stood by the window, arms folded, glaring daggers. Myrcella and Tommen huddled together, pale and quiet. Behind them, a pair of handmaids hovered, looking as though they might faint if addressed. Lord Stark, Cersei said coolly. She did not rise from her seat. Have you come to torture me with talk of my crimes? Or will you be so kind as to release my children from this travesty? Ned inclined his head. I've come to see to your comfort and to assure you that no harm is intended. Robert is dead, and the realm is in a precarious state. You must understand that we cannot allow you free rein. She laughed bitterly, the sound scraping the air. Free rein? I was the queen of the 7 kingdoms not 3 days past. Now I'm a prisoner in my own chambers. How quickly fortunes change. Joffrey's hands clenched into fists. I'll have your head for this, Stark. I'll have it on a spike. I am king. Ned regarded him calmly, though inside he seethed at the boy's arrogance. You are under my protection, Prince Joffrey, until we determine if you are the lawful heir. I will not see you harmed. If you wish for better lodging, I'll arrange it. Cersei's lip curled. Am I to thank you for caging us so kindly? Ned kept his composure. You may attend Robert's funeral rites in 3 days' time. You and your children. Under guard, of course, but no man will dare lay a hand on you. If you attempt flight or incite unrest, we will be forced to confine you further. Her green eyes glimmered with scorn. I remember your father, the old Lord Stark. I remember what happened to him. The Targaryens burned him in this very city. You might do well to recall that King's Landing devours honorable men. Ned felt the words like a lash. He thought of his own father's death, his brother Brandon strangled on the orders of the Mad King. He refused to show any reaction. The realm has changed since the days of Aerys, he said evenly. Now, if you have no further requests, I'll leave you in peace. She rose then, graceful despite the fury in her posture. I have a request. Let my children walk in the gardens. You have your guards. They won't run away, but to keep them in these chambers day in and day out. Do you understand what you're doing to them? Ned's throat tightened. He looked at Myrcella and Tommen. The girl's wide eyes were brimming with tears she bravely tried to hide, and Tommen trembled as if he might cry outright. Whatever their parentage, they were still children. He gave a slow nod. Very well. For 1 hour each day they may walk under guard. I'll ensure their safety. Joffrey scowled. I'm no child. I demand. Cersei silenced him with a gesture, her eyes never leaving Ned's face. Thank you, she said, though her tone was cold. We will do so tomorrow, if that pleases you, Lord Protector. Ned dipped his head in assent. When he left, he could feel her stare drilling into his back. Out in the corridor, he exhaled, heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She was cunning, yes, but those 2 younger children had done no wrong. They were simply caught up in this monstrous game. He strode away, ignoring the sideways looks from the guards. At the end of the corridor waited Peter Baelish. How that man always seemed to materialize in the right place was a puzzle. How went the audience? Littlefinger asked in a hush. As you'd expect. She hates me. Joffrey threatened me, and the younger children tremble in fear. Baelish nodded slowly. A cornered lioness is the most dangerous kind. Ned could not dispute it. The following 2 days passed in a blur of vigilance. The city, already tense from the king's death, buzzed with rumors that the Lannisters were under arrest. At first, murmurs of a Stark coup spread, but these were swiftly tempered by men who circulated Littlefinger's carefully curated version of events. That Lord Stark held the city by Robert's final command, that the Lannisters were not brutalized but merely contained, that this was a matter of preventing civil war. Ned spent hours in conference with the City Watch, ensuring their loyalty. Janos Slynt oozed his usual self-importance, promising that gold cloaks patrolled every street. Varys glided in and out, offering quiet words about who in the city might remain loyal to the Lannisters and who might be swayed. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister, housed uncomfortably in the Tower of the Hand under close guard, refused to speak with Ned. He made a show of practicing with wooden swords in the yard, goading the watchmen to spar. Ned often heard the ring of wood on wood from the tower's windows. Jaime was no prisoner in chains. Ned did not want him publicly humiliated, but neither was he free, and the man's pride simmered dangerously. On the second night, an urgent message reached Ned that a pair of gold cloaks had been found slain near the postern gate. A third watchman was missing. Fearing a Lannister infiltration or escape attempt, Ned hurried to the scene, accompanied by Jory and a squad of men. They found the gate locked, the bodies left in dark pools of blood. One had his throat slit, the other battered in a savage fight. Tracks? Ned asked, kneeling by the bloodstains. Too many footprints crossing here, Jory said, lantern light flickering across the stones. Could have been done by men from inside or outside. Looks like a scuffle. Ned's mouth set in a grim line. Had someone attempted to free the Queen or Jaime? Or was it some petty crime that ended in murder? The timing felt suspicious. He rose and barked orders to the surrounding men. Double the guard on every gate. Nobody enters or leaves without my word. Search the grounds, every corner, every stable, every storeroom. If we find the missing watchman, we might learn the truth. They searched through the night with no result. The missing watchman had vanished, leaving only the dead behind. Ned returned to the Tower of the Hand at dawn, exhausted and heartsick. If they could murder 2 men under Ned's watch, what else might they do? On the morning of the funeral, the bells rang again, calling all who wished to pay respects to the great September of Baelor. Robert's body had been prepared and laid out for viewing, his remains displayed in a grand, carved bier. The city thronged with mourners, some genuine, some curious, and some simply seeking spectacle. Crowds lined the streets from the Red Keep to the Sept. Ned dressed in his formal Stark attire. A dark gray tunic, a silver clasp shaped like a direwolf. He strapped on his sword purely for ceremonial purposes. Outside his chambers, Jory and several men waited. "We'll accompany you to collect the Queen and her children," Jory said. They made their way to Cersei's apartments, where a small squad of gold cloaks had assembled. Ser Barristan Selmy stood with them, his white cloak immaculate in the morning light. He bowed stiffly to Ned, then to the Queen as she emerged, black lace veil covering her golden hair. Joffrey was at her side, wearing a fine doublet of black velvet. Myrcella and Tommen followed, each dressed in dark mourning clothes. The children looked wary but composed. "I trust we can walk in peace," Cersei said, her chin lifted. Ned gave a curt nod. "You have my word. The funeral procession is assembled. We'll move together to the September." The courtyard was filled with onlookers, courtiers who had not dared approach the Queen until now. A hush fell as Ned led the way, with Cersei, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen behind, surrounded by gold cloaks and knights of the Kingsguard. Jaime Lannister was conspicuous by his absence, forced to remain behind in custody. The great gates of the Red Keep stood open, revealing the city beyond. The slow, measured toll of the bells reverberated in the air. A line of men-at-arms formed a corridor through which the funeral procession would pass. Ned could see, up ahead, a gilded litter bearing Robert's coffin, draped in the golden banner of House Baratheon. Cersei's lips thinned as she took in the sight of the city's watchful eyes. Joffrey cast a sullen glare, but there was an undercurrent of grief in the boy's expression that Ned found curious. Perhaps he had, in his own twisted way, cared for the man he believed his father. They stepped onto the route that led from the Red Keep to the Great September of Baelor on Visonyas Hill. The city crowds, held back by gold cloaks, watched in near silence. Some onlookers bowed their heads, others reached out as if to touch the passing train of lords and ladies. The steady drumbeat of footsteps mingled with the bells. At the center of the procession, Ned strode with measured pace, ignoring the prickle of countless stairs. Renly Baratheon walked not far behind him. Ser Barristan was to Ned's right, while gold cloaks flanked them in a protective ring around the Queen and the royal children. The Queen's veil fluttered in the morning breeze, giving occasional glimpses of her pale face, set in a mask of grim composure. As they crossed the city, Ned glimpsed the rancid gutters, the tangle of narrow alleys behind the main avenue, the poor folk straining to see from behind barricades. Many had come to pay final respects to the only king they'd known since the rebellion. Robert had been beloved by some for his jolly presence, his tournaments, his once heroic image. Others cursed him for high taxes and rampant debt. But on this day, the city was subdued, as if unsure how to feel. When they reached the foot of the Great September, a flight of wide marble steps ascended to towering doors that stood open to receive the coffin. Inside, the interior was lit by hundreds of tall candles. A host of septas and septons chanted prayers to the seven. The statue of the father loomed overhead, one hand raised in judgment, while the mother's statue faced it, arms open in mercy. Ned took his place at the front near the bier, while the Queen and her children stood on the opposite side. Robert's sealed coffin was borne by 6 knights, including Ser Barristan. Renly had insisted on helping, but in the end, the older knights took precedence. The coffin was laid gently on a raised dais before the altar. The chanting of the septons rose in volume, echoing beneath the high dome. Lords and ladies filed in, some kneeling, some bowing their heads, all in black or somber hues. Marjorie Tyrell was not present. No Tyrell had arrived from the Reach. The Lannister side was represented only by Cersei and the children, for Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be traveling in the Riverlands, and Tywin's summoned bannermen remained far to the west. The High Septon, an elderly man in elaborate robes, conducted the funeral service in a voice trembling with age. He spoke of King Robert's bravery in his youth, of the realm's unity after the rebellion, of better days when peace seemed assured. He did not speak of Robert's final hunts or the crippling debts, nor of the whispers of illegitimacy that coiled around the Queen's children. All of that was left outside the sacred walls, if only for this hour. Ned found himself gazing at Robert's coffin, remembering a younger man with fierce eyes and a triumphant grin, standing victorious after the trident. Where had that king gone? Consumed by grief, wine, and the slow decay of a life ill-managed. Now he lay lifeless, the realm's burdens passed to men who squabbled over the succession. Ned's chest grew tight with the weight of it. He cast a glance across at Cersei, whose eyes shone with tears that might have been real, or might have been purely for appearance's sake. Joffrey stared stonily at the coffin, his jaw set. Myrcella sniffled, tears slipping down her cheeks, and Tommen clung to her hand, eyes reddened. They looked, at that moment, like any other bereaved children mourning a father. For a fraction of a heartbeat, Ned's resolve faltered. Could he be wrong about them? No, the evidence was too strong. The color of their hair, the secrets of their parentage. Yet the sorrow they felt might still be real, for Robert had been a presence in their lives, if only from a distance. The chanting ended, and the High Septon called for a final blessing. The gathered nobles knelt, including Ned. The Queen and her children did likewise. Silence pressed in, broken only by the flicker of candles and the hushed rustle of robes. The smell of incense clung to the air, thick and sweet. Ned bowed his head, offering a silent prayer that the realm might see no more needless death. When the ceremony finished, the crowd began to file out. Ned stood, exhaustion weighing on him like a physical chain. He signaled for the gold cloaks to remain vigilant around the Queen's party. But Cersei approached him in a swirl of black skirts, her voice low. "Lord Stark," she said, "I would remain a moment with Robert before we return. Surely you can allow that." Ned dipped his head. "Very well. We'll escort you back once you're finished." She gave a curt nod, and the children followed her to the coffin, stepping past the dais. Ser Barristan stood there, solemn, to ensure they would not linger too long. Ned hung back near the exit, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Renly stepped up beside him. "At least the city saw we can maintain decorum. That's something." Ned glanced at him. "Yes, but I know how powder-keg this is. One spark, and we'll have chaos." Renly exhaled. "Have you heard anything from the Vale or from your sister-in-law at the Eyrie? They might rally to you, especially if they believe the Lannisters are in the wrong." Ned shook his head. "No ravens returned yet. I can only hope Lisa sees the need for unity, though her actions of late have been unpredictable. She refused to aid us during Tyrion Lannister's captivity, and she's fiercely protective of her son. That boy is her entire world." Renly's mouth tightened. "Indeed, and what of Stannis? Do we have any sense of when he might arrive?" "None," Ned said grimly. "Not yet." Moments later, the Queen turned back toward them, her children in tow. The look on Joffrey's face was complicated, grief warred with anger, and some emotion Ned could not name. Myrcella seemed on the verge of sobs, and Tommen stared at the floor. Cersei, however, wore a mask of unbreakable resolve, her eyes cool. "The funeral is done," Ned said to her quietly. "The next step is to place Robert's coffin in the royal crypts. That will happen tomorrow. If you wish to attend, you may, but you will be guarded." She lifted her chin. "Of course, I have no illusions." Her gaze swept the great September, lingering on the tall statues of the seven. "The gods see all," they say. I wonder if they see this travesty for what it is. Without waiting for an answer, she motioned for her children to follow. Ned and the gold cloaks fell in step around them, leading the return to the Red Keep. The afternoon sun, once they emerged from the sept, shone brighter, the clouds thinning a bit, yet the atmosphere felt no less heavy. Word of the funeral's formalities would spread, but so would rumors that the Lannisters walked under guard. The bells had ceased their toll, replaced by the normal city cacophony of hawkers, hammered steel, horse hooves, and distant shouts. They ascended the hill back to the castle, and Ned was grateful when the portcullis closed behind them. He ordered that Cersei and her children be returned to their chambers. The crowd of courtiers parted like a tide, none daring to intrude. Joffrey cast a bitter glance at Ned before disappearing into the corridor, gold cloaks on every side. Cersei said nothing, only let herself be guided away. In the courtyard, Ned lingered, half-dazed by the swirl of events. He noticed Ser Barristan deep in quiet conversation with Renly near a column. Varys hovered at a remove, as though waiting for an opportune moment to approach. The hush in the yard felt brittle. "My lord," Varys said at last, gliding forward with a concerned tilt of his head. "That was as smooth a funeral as we could have hoped for under the circumstances. But you should know, the city is uneasy. Last night, the Baker's quarter had a scuffle. Word is that men loyal to the Lannisters tried to stir trouble, claiming the Starks had seized the throne unlawfully." Ned massaged his temples. "Have they been arrested?" "Some fled, some were roughed up by the watch before they could vanish. None of this is surprising. We have little to fear from small pockets of unrest, so long as the majority remain calm. But one large spark." He made a gesture of a sudden explosion. "Until the realm sees a clear path forward for the crown, the city will remain on edge," Ned said, echoing his own thoughts. "We wait on Stannis, or we face Tywin Lannister." Varys dipped his head. "Just so. In the meantime, I've heard rumors from the north. Some talk of bannermen preparing to muster. Perhaps your wife's father, Lord Hoster Tully, likewise stirs in the Riverlands. Word travels quickly that King's Landing is in an uproar." Ned stiffened. If Catelyn had heard of his coup, how would she respond? She was still away, last he knew, escorting Tyrion Lannister to the Eyrie. That fiasco had ended with Tyrion's release, but the animosity between houses remained. He turned, meaning to ascend to his private chambers, when a breathless messenger nearly collided with him. "My lord," the boy stammered, "a raven from Dragonstone has arrived." Ned's heart kicked against his ribs. So soon? He followed the boy to the rookery, where a single bird perched, ruffling its feathers in the draught. A small scroll was in the hands of one of the maesters, who squinted at the seal. Ned recognized the flaming heart sigil pressed into the red wax. Stannis's personal sign, ever since he'd fallen under the influence of that foreign priestess, Melisandre. Ned carefully broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. His eyes flicked across the words, heart pounding with each line. Stannis's tone was formal, abrupt, and as stony as the man himself. "Lord Eddard Stark, protector of the realm, your letter has reached me, carrying with it tidings of the king's untimely death and allegations regarding the boy Joffrey's parentage. I have long suspected such. If you have seized the city in King Robert's name, you act with honor, and I commend your resolve. Still, we face a grave threat. Know that I am mustering ships and swords. I will sail for King's Landing with all possible haste. When I arrive, I shall claim what is mine by right. Prepare to relinquish your regency into my hands, that we may proceed with a united front against those who would defy the laws of gods and men. Should the Lannisters resist, they will be met with fire and steel. Stannis of the House Baratheon, the first of his name by rights, Lord of Dragonstone, Master of Ships, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Ned rolled the parchment back up. The numbness in his fingers was not from the cold. Stannis was indeed marching by sea. If he reached King's Landing to find the Lannisters in open revolt, war would erupt. Ned could only pray that a swift show of unity might break the Lannister will to fight. Yet Tywin Lannister was as proud as any man alive, and Cersei was cunning beyond measure. He rubbed his brow, the beginnings of a headache throbbing behind his eyes. It seems the rightful king is coming, Varys, who had slipped in behind him, murmured. Do you sense relief or dread, my lord? Both, Ned admitted. If the Lannisters do not yield, blood will flow in the streets. We can only do our best to prevent it, Varys said, his voice soft as ever. Ned left the rookery, already planning how best to handle Stannis' impending arrival. He would need to gather the small council. He would need to tell Renly, who might well flee the city rather than bend the knee to his elder brother. He would need to keep the Lannisters under strict watch, lest they attempt an escape or murder. And above all, he had to ensure that his daughters remained safe. He walked briskly across the courtyard, cloak snapping in a sudden gust of wind. The heavy sky threatened rain. Gray steps carried him back into the Tower of the Hand. Inside, he found Arya sitting in the hall, perched on a windowsill with needle across her knees. She was fiddling with the blade's point, wearing a scowl that suggested some new frustration. When she saw him, she hopped down. Father, is it true what everyone is saying? That a new king is coming? He studied her serious little face. She reminded him so much of Lyanna at that age. Wild, untamed, full of fire. Yes, he answered slowly. Stannis Baratheon is sailing for King's Landing to claim the throne, and it may be that all in the city must swear fealty or fight. Arya's eyes flicked to the blade in her hand. Will we fight? Ned gently placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her away from the window. Not if I can prevent it. War is a terrible thing, Arya. It's not like your practice with Syrio. People die screaming, friends and foes alike. I'd do anything to keep you and Sansa away from that. She lowered her gaze, biting her lip. But if the Lannisters come for us, I'll protect you, Ned said firmly, though the vow tasted hollow given how precarious their situation was. Stay close, do not roam. That is the best thing you can do. She nodded in reluctant acceptance. Yes, father. Ned ruffled her hair softly, a rare gesture of affection. He saw the worry flickering in her eyes. He saw the same worry in every corner of the Red Keep now. It was a hush before the storm. Summoning his resolve, he made for the council chamber. The ravens had brought Stannis' message, and now the council must decide how to prepare. But as he entered the chamber, he found only Peter Baelish there, tapping a finger on the table idly. Lord Stark, Peter said, arching an eyebrow at Ned's expression. You look as if you've seen a ghost. In a sense, Ned said, holding up the letter. Stannis marches. He calls himself king already. He expects me to bow and deliver the realm into his hands. Littlefinger took the parchment, skimming the lines with a faint, cynical twist to his lips. Yes, that sounds like Stannis. Blunt as a cudgel. He offers no sweet words, no requests, only commands. So do you intend to comply? Ned paced, the stone floors cold beneath his boots. He is the rightful heir if Joffrey is proved illegitimate. I gave Robert my word that I would see the realm governed by its lawful king. I cannot turn away from that. Littlefinger shrugged, setting the parchment aside. Then prepare for blood. Tywin Lannister will not abandon his cause. And Renly might not yield so easily either. He has ambition. The realm could tear itself into 3 or 4 pieces unless we manage a careful negotiation. And you have a suggestion, I suppose? Ned asked, half dreading the answer. Peter smiled that thin, self-assured smile. A suggestion, yes. Convince Renly to depart the city quietly. He won't openly defy you if he sees no immediate advantage. Then we keep a tight hold on the Lannisters, so Tywin cannot make a move without endangering his daughter and grandchildren. When Stannis arrives, we stage a formal acceptance of his claim with the entire city watching. We kneel, the gold cloaks kneel, the Queen and Joffrey kneel. That's the moment of absolute humiliation for House Lannister. But they'll have no choice if they want to keep breathing. That is, unless Tywin invades. Ned stared at him. And if Tywin does invade? Then we fight with Stannis at our side, controlling the seas. The city's defenders might hold out, especially with the North rallying to you. If the Tyrells remain neutral or join Stannis, Tywin is outflanked. War ends quickly, but it all depends on a single moment, bending the knee or raising swords. Ned closed his eyes, envisioning the bloodshed that would spill across these streets. I want no war. I want the realm to transition to its rightful king in peace. Is that too much to ask? Littlefinger's gaze was steady, if not unkind. In Westeros, such transitions rarely come without swords. They spent the next hours drafting strategies, half the time going in circles. Renly did not attend. He had closeted himself away, presumably to consider whether to yield the city or seize what power he could before Stannis arrived. Pycelle drowsed in his seat, contributing little. Varys offered a few cryptic remarks about contacts in the Stormlands. In the end, little was truly settled, except that Ned would hold the city until Stannis arrived and then cede authority, assuming Stannis came swiftly. That night, a storm swept in from the sea. Lightning flickered beyond the walls, and thunder rattled the casements of the Red Keep. Rain sluiced down, drenching the rooftops in a wild torrent. Ned lay awake in his bed, the covers pulled up, but no warmth could penetrate the chill in his bones. Each flash of lightning lit the dark, revealing the carved beams overhead. Each crack of thunder brought him back to the day Robert had died, to the weight of his final promise. He rose at last, unable to sleep, and slipped into the hallway. Guards stood at their posts, turning curious gazes as he passed. He merely nodded and continued on. He found himself walking toward the small sept within the Tower of the Hand. Inside, by the soft light of candles, he knelt and tried to pray. He found no words, only a silent entreaty. Let there be no war. Let my children be safe. Let the realm be spared. But no sudden warmth of the gods enveloped him. No voice whispered in answer. The thunder rolled on, and he realized with a hollow ache that the realm's destiny was not so easily swayed by prayer. It rested in the hands of men like Tywin Lannister, Stannis Baratheon, and, he loathed to admit, Peter Baelish. At length he returned to bed, though not to sleep. Morning arrived, bleak and wet. The castle courtyards lay flooded in places, and the air smelled of damp stone. Ned dressed and broke his fast on bread and honey, uninterested in heavier fare. Jory came to him with the night's report. No more suspicious incidents, though the city was restless with the storm. Jaime Lannister had taken to pacing the halls of the Tower of the Hand, scowling at the guards but never attempting to break free. A knock on the door heralded a new visitor. Renly Baratheon, clad in a dark green cloak trimmed with gold. The antler sigil of his house pinned it at the shoulder. He greeted Ned stiffly. "May I speak with you alone, Lord Stark?" Ned nodded, sending Jory away. The two men stood in Ned's solar, rain pattering against the window. "I'm leaving the city," Renly said bluntly. "I have some loyal men in the Stormlands, and I intend to gather them. This city has grown too dangerous, and I do not fancy kneeling if my brother is to come in swords drawn. If he wants the throne that badly, let him have it." Ned felt a surge of both relief and unease. "You won't challenge him, then? You do not want the crown yourself?" Renly gave a mirthless laugh. "I would make a better king than Stannis ever could. He's humorless and harsh, but I'm no fool. I see your mind is set on upholding the line of succession, and if the Lannisters contest it, we'll have war. I don't want to be trapped in King's Landing when that happens, nor do I want to fight my own brother. So I'll remove myself from the board." Ned exhaled slowly. "And if Stannis invites you to join him once he's crowned?" Renly shrugged. "I may return, or I may not. Let him prove he can hold the realm first. I have the Stormlands by right, anyway. That was Robert's arrangement. Ned offered a hand. I hope you'll keep the peace, Lord Renly. We have enough foes at the gates. Renly clasped Ned's hand briefly, though there was a subtle tension in his grip. I wish you luck, Eddard Stark. You'll need it. That afternoon, Renly departed with a small retinue, slipping out through the iron gate at the far side of the castle grounds. Ned had the city watch escort him to the city limits, ensuring no violence flared. With Renly gone, one potential claimant to the throne was removed from immediate contention. That left only Stannis and the Lannisters. Day by day, tension mounted. More rumors reached Ned's ears. Tywin Lannister was indeed calling his bannermen. Ravens from the west confirmed as much. Raids occurred on roads leading to King's Landing, likely the work of brigands or the mountain Gregor Clegane, who was known to terrorize the Riverlands. Ned dispatched more gold cloaks to guard travelers, but the city's forces were stretched thin. The summer wines began to run low in the capital, prices rising. The small folk grumbled that grain shipments might be in danger if House Tyrell took a side. Cersei, confined to her chambers, demanded frequent audiences but provided little more than scathing remarks and threats. Joffrey fumed, Myrcella and Tommen grew paler by the day, and Jaime paced like a caged wolf in the Tower of the Hand. None attempted open escape, for the watch was too thick and Ned's vigilance too constant. In the midst of this uneasy waiting, a second raven arrived from Dragonstone. It bore a single line from Stannis' hand. I come. No more, no less. Ned spent hours on the battlements, scanning the horizon, though the city's walls gave no sight of the sea beyond the Blackwater Bay's winding channel. He wondered how large a fleet Stannis would bring. Would he arrive with a show of force or slip in quietly? Every day that passed felt like a coiled spring, wound tighter. On an overcast morning a fortnight after Robert's funeral, a cry went up from the port. Ned hurried to the battlements overlooking the harbor. Beneath a sky of rolling gray clouds, sails dotted the horizon. Dark sails emblazoned with the fiery heart of the Lord of Light, the sigil Stannis had adopted under the guidance of that red priestess. A dozen war galleys, at least, with more behind them. Soldiers thronged the decks. A hush fell over the city as those formidable ships glided closer, oars churning the water. Ned gave the order to allow them in but to keep a large presence of gold cloaks on the docks. Some lords whispered that perhaps they should bar Stannis from entering with his full force. But Ned had promised that the rightful king would be welcomed. Even if that promise might prove the city's undoing, he would keep it. By midday, the first warship moored at King's Landing's main pier. Soldiers in dark tabards filed onto the docks, their boots thudding in a grim cadence. At their head rode Stannis Baratheon himself, astride a tall warhorse. He was a spare, sinewy man with a tightly trimmed beard flecked in gray, a face carved in stern lines, and eyes like chips of black ice. Beside him rode Melisandre, the Red Woman, cloaked in scarlet that clung to her slender form. Her fiery hair matched the color of her attire. She looked upon the city with a faint, knowing smile. Ned descended to the quay in person, flanked by Ser Barristan, Littlefinger, Varys, and a contingent of gold cloaks. He wore his Stark sigil openly, a dire wolf pinned to his breast, and carried himself with all the authority he could muster. Stannis dismounted, his posture rigid. Lord Eddard Stark. His voice was as cold as the wind off the sea. You have done the realm a service by containing these Lannisters and preserving order. I trust my seat is prepared. Ned bowed, not deeply, but enough to show respect to the man he believed to be the lawful heir. Welcome to King's Landing, my lord. The Iron Throne waits. But I caution you, the Lannisters remain coiled like vipers within the keep. They will not yield without protest. Stannis' mouth tightened. He glanced at Melisandre, who regarded Ned with her unsettling red eyes. Then they shall face the king's judgment. Lead the way, Lord Protector. They mounted a small retinue of horses brought for the occasion. The city parted before them, small folk lining the streets to watch the new arrival. A hush of uncertainty hung in the air. Was this man truly their king? Where was the blond boy who'd once been called Prince? Some knelt, others only stared. Melisandre's scarlet cloak drew whispers. Red sorcery, some said. Others prayed to the Seven to ward off her foreign god. So it was that Stannis Baratheon entered King's Landing. Not with trumpets and cheers, but with sullen curiosity and a measure of fear. When they reached the Red Keep, Ned guided him into the throne room. The vast hall was lit by torches despite the midday gloom, and the Iron Throne loomed at the far end, its twisted swords catching the flickering light. Behind them marched a line of Stannis's men, silent as a blade in the night, each bearing arms that glinted with disciplined menace. Stannis paused before the throne. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Then, in a clipped voice, he said, "Where are the Lannisters?" Ned answered quietly, "Queen Cersei and her children are confined in the royal apartments. Jaime Lannister is in the Tower of the Hand, under guard. Tywin Lannister remains in the west, raising an army, but he has not yet attacked." Stannis nodded curtly. "Good. Fetch them here. I will see them brought to heel or punished." Ned hesitated. "If I may suggest caution, my lord, the city is a tinderbox. Dragging them here in chains for all to see could spark an uprising among Lannister loyalists. We have them under control. We should negotiate, or at least consider." "There will be no negotiation," Stannis snapped, eyes flashing. "They have usurped the throne for years, deceiving my brother, endangering the line of succession. They are traitors. The penalty is death." His words cut the air like a sword. Ned felt an urge to protest, for the children's sake if nothing else. But the set of Stannis's jaw told him reason would be a thin shield here. The new king turned to the men behind him, giving a curt gesture. One knight stepped forward, presumably a commander in Stannis's host. Stannis said, "Have the queen and her eldest brought here at once. If they resist, force them. If any try to rally arms, kill them." The knight saluted and strode away with a detachment of men. Ned swallowed. This was happening too quickly. If word spread that Cersei and Joffrey were about to be dragged to face possible execution, the Red Keep could erupt. Jaime might do something desperate. Even the city watch might split. Some were loyal to gold, but others might balk at the idea of slaughtering the children. He dared a step closer to Stannis. "I ask that you show mercy, at least for Myrcella and Tommen. They are young. They did not conspire in this crime." Stannis's gaze flicked to him, colder than a midnight sea. "We shall see, Lord Stark. If they are not of Baratheon blood, they are no kin of mine, but I do not relish harming children." As for Joffrey, he let the implication hang. Across the hall, Peter Baelish observed with narrowed eyes, lips pursed. Varys stood near a pillar, expression inscrutable. Ser Barristan, ever the knight, looked uneasy. Outside, thunder rumbled again. The storm had not truly passed. It seemed, just lingered on the horizon. Ned bowed his head slightly, feeling the gravity of the moment. He had delivered the city to Stannis, fulfilling the letter of Robert's will. But in doing so, had he unleashed a king who might plunge them into a new wave of violence? The hall's massive doors boomed open. Armored men ushered in Cersei and Joffrey, their wrists bound, though not cruelly tight. Myrcella and Tommen were not with them. Perhaps Stannis's men had deemed them less dangerous, or had not yet fetched them. Joffrey was struggling, face contorted with fury, while Cersei walked with regal bearing despite her constraints, her green eyes burning with hatred. "I am your queen," she spat as they approached the throne. "Unhand me." Joffrey's voice cracked with desperation and rage. "I'll see you all put to death. I am the king. Do you hear me?" Stannis stepped forward, radiating austere power. "No, you are not. If you were Robert's trueborn son, perhaps. But you are not. This ends now." Cersei glared at Ned, spitting each word. "You spineless traitor. You would deliver us to this cold fish. Do you truly think Robert wanted such a monster on the throne?" Ned's mouth went dry. "Your Grace, Robert wanted the rightful heir, and so do I. Stannis gestured sharply. Guards forced Cersei and Joffrey to their knees before the Iron Throne. The echo of steel on stone rang through the hall. Joffrey struggled, shouting profanity and half-formed threats. Cersei's face was a mask of fury, though fear lurked beneath. "Jaime Lannister will come for us," Joffrey snarled, voice trembling. "My grandfather will come. You'll all die." Stannis's face might have been carved from granite. "If they come, they come. The throne is mine by right, and I'll defend it." He glanced at Ned. "You have done your duty, Lord Stark. Step aside." Ned found his heart hammering. "Hello." "Okay to Joffrey. No more than 13 or 14, vicious but still a boy. Executing him would be an act that could spark even more bloodshed." But if Stannis insisted on it, how could Ned intervene without defying the very king he had put in place? In the hush of the throne room, as the new king glared down at his captives, the swords of the Iron Throne gleamed like hungry teeth. The torches flickered, shadows dancing on the walls as if in ominous anticipation. Cersei lifted her chin. "You do this, and House Lannister will tear you apart. You may kill us, but your reign will be drenched in blood. You'll be no better than the Mad King." Stannis's lips tightened. "I am no Mad King, woman. I am justice long delayed. Joffrey, bastard son of Jaime Lannister and Cersei Lannister, I charge you with treason against the crown and the realm. You stand accused of usurping the throne and conspiring to conceal your true parentage." Joffrey spat. "You have no proof." Stannis turned to Ned once more. "Produce what evidence you have. Let this be done properly, so that none can call my ascension into question." Ned, heart-pounding, gestured to Ser Barristan, who brought forth the genealogical records. The Baratheon line, proving the consistent trait of black hair in all Baratheon children. He then presented the statements of Pycelle regarding certain anomalies, though the old maester stammered and sweated under Stannis's glare, uncertain if he should truly speak ill of the Lannisters. Finally, Ned produced a written record from the diaries of the late Jon Arryn, referencing "the seed is strong." Throughout the recitation, Joffrey sneered and shouted denials. Cersei's face hardened to pale marble. The hall listened in riveted silence. Lords and knights gathered to witness the final condemnation. When Ned finished, Stannis spoke in a voice that was cold and final. "There can be no doubt. Jaime Lannister fathered you, boy. Robert Baratheon was deceived. In the eyes of gods and men, you have no claim to the Iron Throne." Joffrey struggled in his captor's grip, tears starting at the corners of his eyes, though they burned with fury. He launched a stream of curses that made even the hardened soldiers cringe. Cersei twisted in a last attempt to free herself, face contorted. "You butcher! You usurper!" Stannis nodded to the guards. "Take them to the dungeons." A hush shuddered through the onlookers. Even Ned felt an uneasy jolt. Dungeons were but a short step away from the headsman's block. Cersei's voice rose in desperate defiance. "Tommen and Myrcella, they too are false," Stannis said. "But they are children. They may be spared if they do not defy me. As for you and Joffrey, your fates shall be determined by the king's justice." Cersei's cry echoed through the throne room as the guards dragged her and Joffrey away. The double doors slammed shut behind them, sealing that dreadful scene. Silence fell. Melisandre stepped beside Stannis, placing a slender hand upon his arm as if in benediction. Her voice was soft yet carried clearly. "The night is dark and full of terrors, your grace, but the Lord of Light stands with you." Stannis nodded curtly, turning at last to Ned. "You have done as was asked, Lord Stark. The city is in my hands now. The Lannisters will answer for their crimes. As of this moment, I claim the Iron Throne." He advanced toward it, each step echoing on the polished floor. Ned felt the eyes of the hall shift to him, to see if he would kneel. Littlefinger and Varys watched with cool interest. Ser Barristan's face showed only stoic acceptance. The lordly spectators parted, leaving a clear path to the dais of swords. Stannis ascended the steps, the metal seat looming over him. He paused, then settled himself upon the Iron Throne. The swords jutted into his back, cold and unforgiving, but he did not flinch. His dark eyes roamed the silent hall. "Bend the knee," he said, in a voice that brooked no argument. All of you, one by one, the lords sank to their knees, as did the gold cloaks. Ser Barristan knelt with slow dignity, followed by Pycelle, who nearly toppled, trembling, and then Varys, who lowered his head with practiced humility. Peter Baelish offered a graceful bow, though his eyes never left Stannis' face. Ned Stark, last of all, stepped forward. He went down on one knee. He heard his heartbeat pulsing in his ears, felt the coldness of the floor through his breeches. He looked up, meeting Stannis' unyielding gaze. "Your Grace," Ned said quietly, "I acknowledge you as the rightful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men." Stannis nodded. "Rise, then. You shall continue as Lord Protector until my rule is fully established. But make no mistake, I will rule as king, not as some figurehead. We must ready ourselves for war, for Tywin Lannister will not surrender easily." Ned rose, feeling numb. War. Despite all his efforts, this was the outcome. The Lannisters held the West, Tywin had an army, and Jaime was still under guard. In the blink of an eye, Stannis' severity had swept away the possibility of a gentler resolution. He recalled Robert's dying words, "Protect the realm." He had tried, but the realm would soon be soaked in blood. Stannis had the throne now, but House Lannister would never yield quietly. Ned prayed the conflict would be brief, that Tywin might see no victory in assaulting a city prepared to withstand siege, allied with the North and the Stormlands, and possibly the Vale. But Tywin's pride was legendary. Stannis looked to his men. "Prepare the city's defenses. Post more men at the gates and the walls. Summon the ships in the harbor. We will not be taken by surprise." The hall erupted in activity. Nobles scrambled to obey, gold cloaks ran to pass orders, and Stannis' knights took command of strategic points. Ned found himself standing amid the swirl, uncertain what to feel. He had staged a coup to protect the realm from immediate chaos, to prevent the Lannisters from seizing the throne. Now that he had delivered the city to Stannis, the realm would face a new war. Stannis' war for undisputed rule. Littlefinger appeared at Ned's side. "Speaking under the din, you see? One must often choose between two storms, my lord. You chose the storm named Stannis. Let's pray it's less destructive than the alternative." Ned said nothing, exhaustion weighing on him. He glanced around for some sign of hope, perhaps a courier from the Tyrells offering peace, or a messenger from Tywin seeking to negotiate. None such appeared. The only future he saw was the clash of armies. Outside, the thunder rumbled again. Closer now. Stannis Baratheon, enthroned, gazed down upon the lords of the Seven Kingdoms with a grim visage, Melisandre at his side like a silent flame. Justice would come, hard, unyielding, and bloody. In the hush between thunderclaps, Ned wondered if, by grasping at honor and the letter of the law, he had steered the realm from one monstrous war straight into another. Yet a small voice inside him insisted that at least he had upheld Robert's will, that a true line of succession had been enforced. He had refused to let cunning lies place a bastard on the throne. If that was a mistake, it was one born of principle, and though he felt the weight of all that might come, Eddard Stark could stand by it. He took a slow breath and gazed about the throne room, at the swirling banners, the torchlit columns, the dais of swords where Stannis sat. Above, the high windows drummed with rain. The Game of Thrones was not over, far from it. But for this day, the city had a new king, and the future would be shaped by his iron will. Ned bowed once more, then moved to help secure the city. For better or worse, the coup was done, and his place in it was written in the blood and ink of the realm's uncertain history.